Imagine, if you will, a podcast. A podcast beyond that which is known to man. It exists in both fandom and discovery, in viewing and critiquing. My name is Matt Hurt. This is Anthology. Hello and welcome to Anthology, presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. If this is your first time listening, Anthology is a podcast exploring science fiction anthology storytelling during television's first golden age, beginning with The Twilight Zone. Each podcast, I share my thoughts on an episode of this iconic series as a first-time viewer, as well as share some trivia about the episode. I then end each podcast with a bonus review of a movie or show related to the week's episode. You can find more of Anthology at anthologypod.com, and if you want to contact me, you can like the Facebook page at facebook.com/anthologypod. You can tweet me at obsessiveviewer, or you can send me an email at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. If you like what you hear and you want to support the podcast, you can do that by heading over to the iTunes page for the podcast and leaving a rating and review. The more ratings and reviews I get, the easier it will be for people to find the show in iTunes' search results, and it will give me validation for what I'm doing here. If you're feeling particularly generous, now that it is around the holidays, and you want to support Anthology with your wallet, there's a donate button on anthologypod.com, as well as a link in the show notes of this episode. The show notes of the episode, of course, can be found at anthologypod.com/029. Every donation made using that donate button goes directly toward the fees to keep the podcast running and is greatly appreciated. So today on the podcast, I'll be discussing The After Hours. It's the 34th episode of The Twilight Zone's first season, and it aired on June 10th, 1960. And for this week's bonus review, I'm going to share my thoughts on the 1980s remake of The After Hours in The Twilight Zone's 1985 revival. This is in Season 2, Episode 4. It's titled The After Hours / Lost and Found. Originally I was going to review The Comedian, an Emmy-winning episode of Playhouse 90 written by Rod Serling. But then I realized that there was a remake, so I decided to switch it up. So frankly, I haven't edited last week's episode yet, so I don't remember if I said that I was going to review The Comedian, but if I did, then it's changed up and it's going to be next week. And I apologize for the inconvenience. Okay, and with that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and dive into my episode here. As per usual, I'm going to read a plot description from the Twilight Zone Companion by Mark Zicree. And from here on out, everything about this episode is going to be spoiled. And so be warned, if you haven't watched it yet, go and check it out on Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, anywhere. Really, it's available in a ton of places. So here is the description, courtesy of the Twilight Zone Companion. Marcia finds the 9th floor to be a disturbingly barren place where the only piece of merchandise is a single gold thimble. This is sold to her by an overly familiar, strangely insolent saleslady. Returning to the main floor, Marcia notices that the thimble is scratched, but when she goes to complain, she's told that there is no 9th floor. Spotting the salesgirl, Marcia points her out and is horrified to see that the figure is a mannequin. Shaken, she is assisted by store personnel to an inner office where she falls asleep. When she awakens, she finds the store closed and herself a prisoner within. As she wanders in the dark, she hears voices speaking to her, which seem to come from the mannequins. Terrified, she backs into an elevator, which takes her to the 9th floor. The mannequins are there, and one by one they come to life, including the saleslady and the elevator operator who originally conducted her to the 9th floor. Under their probing, Marcia remembers that she too is a mannequin. Each of them is allowed a month's sojourn among the humans. But Marcia forgot her true identity and did not return on time. With melancholy resignation, Marcia apologizes, then reverts to her original and inanimate form. This episode stars Anne Francis as Marcia White. This is her first of 2 Twilight Zone episodes. The next we'll see of her is in Jezebel in Season 4. She's probably best known or well, she had a very long career, but she is one of her most notable roles was as Altera Morbius in Forbidden Planet. And this is more anecdotal. I mean, this is not really one of her biggest roles of her career, but I want to point out that she was in an episode of the sitcom Wings back in the 90s. She played a character named Vera in season 7's The Lady Vanishes. Wings is a great show. It's one of my favorite shows. I grew up on that show essentially, and it's amazing. It's a Cheers ripoff sort of, but it's Cheers in an airport on Nantucket. It's really fun, and Anne Francis in that episode plays this really fun kind of noir femme fatale satire character, and it's pretty funny. She has some really good scenes with Tim Daly in that episode. Anne Francis actually retired from acting in 2004 after working in the movie industry for just shy of 60 years. And she received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame on February 8th, 1960. Co-starring in this episode as the saleswoman is Elizabeth Allen. This was her only episode of The Twilight Zone, and as far as trivia for her, she actually retired back in 1980, and she was known as a philanthropist, environmentalist, and an animal lover, and she was noted for donating to several different organizations, including Greenpeace and Save the Children. And finally, James Milholland plays Mr. Armbruster in this episode. This is his first of 3 Twilight Zone episodes. Next is Season 2's Mr. Dingle the Strong. He was also in one episode of One Step Beyond in 1960 that was titled Moment of Hate. Writer for this episode is Rod Serling, and there's an interesting piece of trivia about how he got the inspiration for this episode. If I'm remembering correctly, when the Twilight Zone was ordered, Rod Serling went over to Ray Bradbury's house to talk to him more about science fiction and to kind of learn about science fiction. And so Ray Bradbury, he gave him a bunch of books to read, and one of which had either was or had the short story Evening Primrose by John Collier. And from what I understand, this short story is about a man who kind of escapes his life to live in a department store after it closed for the day. And so he had this life where he lived in the department store, and he soon found that there was, I think, a secret floor where there were a secret society of people living in the department store there. And apparently, if you don't play by the rules in that society, you'll be turned into a mannequin. So that short story influenced Serling a lot in creating this episode of The Twilight Zone. And to round out the talent rundown for this episode, director for this episode was Douglas Hayes. This was his 4th episode of The Twilight Zone, and next we'll see if him is fairly soon in Season 2's Nervous Man in a $4 Room. So with the talent rundown, I like to kind of give a little bit of a preface to where I'm coming from as a first-time viewer of this episode. Usually, as is the kind of concept for this podcast in general, I'm watching these episodes for the first time in my life because I didn't grow up with the Twilight Zone. I didn't really get exposed to it, and so I figured, why not start a podcast where I talk about my impression of the Twilight Zone in 2016 and years later, because this is going to take a while, as a first-time viewer. So, having said that, this was actually one of the episodes that I think that I had seen before. I thought I had seen before. So, my understanding, first of all, was that, judging from images I'd caught glimpses of, that this episode has something to do with mannequins in a department store. That was my idea. And I had this feeling in the back of my head that this was the episode of The Twilight Zone that I had seen either a clip of or most of during one of the marathons when I was back, way back in high school. It had to be about between 10 to 15 years ago. And I remember one day in particular, I was at home. It must have been a holiday break. It may have been New Year's Day. I don't think it was 4th of July. or any other day when they would have had a marathon, but I think it was New Year's Day. No, it was definitely New Year's Day. So I was channel surfing, back in the days when channel surfing was, a thing. Now it's all DVR and streaming services and stuff. You don't really surf channels anymore, at least I don't. But anyway, I was channel surfing and I was kind of, bored, didn't have any plans or anything. Then I came across, Sci-Fi and I saw that it was a marathon of the Twilight Zone. And at this point, I had no idea that this was a yearly thing. I didn't know that that's what they did. So I thought, oh, it'd be fun if I just sat down and watched the Twilight Zone. And I had never seen it, so I didn't know anything about it. And this was the episode that was playing when I started it. And I remember that I hadn't seen the Twilight Zone. I wanted to get a sense of it. And I don't believe I watched it for very long. I think... I was a teenager. I had a short attention span, but I don't believe I watched much of it, or I think I watched most of it. And if I did, I think the ending was a little, I was a little put off by the ending. I don't remember if this is exactly what I thought, but I could see myself watching the ending and going into it expecting time enough at last and getting an ending that is frankly kind of not silly, but I mean, if you're just coming to the Twilight Zone and you have no concept for what to expect in all the episodes, having like your introduction to the Twilight Zone being an episode where a woman discovers that she's actually a mannequin, that could be kind of a tough barrier of entry for the show. Like I think when I saw that, I was just like, okay, if this is how the rest of the show is going to be, or this is how other episodes are going to be, maybe I won't devote the whole day watching it. Which I know at this point, and to a lot of my listeners is probably sacrilegious, and I would not be surprised if you guys come after me with pitchforks and torches. But teenage Matt was snooty and annoying. So unfortunately, I didn't stick around watching the Twilight Zone that day. I wish I had. I really do wish I had, because going through this season so far has just been such a treat, and this is such a great show that I wish I could have devoted an entire day to watching the Twilight Zone when I was a teenager. And it's a shame, because nowadays it's like I can't do that because I'm 30 and I have things to do, and I don't know. It's I don't have the free time that I could have back when I was in high school and didn't have a care in the world. So, having said all that, my actual review for this episode will start now. I'm going to say right up front, this episode gave me a nightmare when I watched it the first time. So I watched it for the first time. This was a few days ago at this point, and I went to sleep that night. I watched it like right before bed, and I took my notes as usual, and then I had a dream, and I'll preface this by saying that I realized that this is super lame to be talking about my dream on a podcast, but it's relevant and it's going to be brief. I promise. Just stick with it. So I went to sleep and I had a pretty vivid dream where I was at work, and I work in an office building. It's 7 stories, and I work on the 5th floor. And so in the dream, I was staying late, which is kind of funny because now it's after daylight savings time. It's getting darker earlier, and I work until 6:30. So by the time I leave work, it's pitch black. So in the dream, I was working late, and I went up to the 6th floor for some reason. And when I was on that floor in the dream, I was surrounded by my coworkers, and they were all trying to help me understand something about that floor. And throughout the entire dream, I kept hearing voices calling to me, and my coworkers were all around me, kind of, helping me understand what was going on. It was very much like they were the mannequins, and they were trying to make me understand something about myself in that situation. It was basically that ending of the After Hours, and it was creepy. It was kind of unsettling, but it wasn't as scary as the episode itself. But I woke up kind of surprised that, this episode of the Twilight Zone, which frankly in that first viewing I didn't really connect with that much. I didn't really find much in it that first viewing, but it permeated my subconscious enough to let me, dream about it. It invaded me on a personal level, and I was able to dream about it, which I thought was really interesting and really telling for the episode. So this episode starts out with the eye opening again, the open eye opening image, and I'm so glad that this is only going to be for a few more episodes, because I really don't like it. I really don't. There's something about that image that just doesn't feel like the Twilight Zone to me. And granted, I've only seen the kind of cavern kind of opening, and it's varied. It switches from like a cavern to like a or a canyon to like a cave, and it's very rocky and stuff. But there's a lot of variety in that opening. And seeing this, that it's just an eye that's stationary, and then you have the Twilight Zone in this weird font that isn't the font that I would associate with the Twilight Zone. It just feels really wrong in this context. I'm glad that it's going to go away, and I hope that in future episodes and future seasons we get, good opening credits or opening themes, because it's just really off-putting to me. I'm not a fan of it. And so we get into the episode, and we're introduced to the set of the department store, which is a fantastic set. It looks so rich, and not necessarily like product wise, but it looks very detailed in terms of a set. And I believe that they used a film set for this, that was shooting on it. I don't have the name of the film offhand. I'm sorry about that, but it's very detailed, and that's something that I really enjoy about it, because it's very busy and just really detailed. And throughout that sequence, or throughout this opening scene where we're seeing the set of the department store and everything, there are mannequins throughout it that are pretty prominent, but not too prominent. They're just kind of there. They're unassuming, and when you watch it on repeat viewings, there's a little bit of foreboding to them. But when you watch it that first time, they're not as pronounced as they could be, and I think that plays to the strengths of the episode really well, because it kind of gets you. They're not as much in focus as anything else, so you kind of get this, like, if you're someone who is kind of hung up on the creepiness of mannequins, you might get it in your head, like a little bit of an idea that, oh, that's kind of creepy or unsettling. But if you're just casually watching it, it doesn't really hit you that hard. But then when you get to the end, where you get the reveal of the mannequins are, lifelike, you get to a point where I think subconsciously you remember that you've seen the mannequins throughout the episode, and I think that can get under your skin quite a bit. And so we're introduced to Marcia, who is walking throughout the store, and she goes to the elevator. And when she gets on the express elevator, there's an interesting bit of horror here. And this is something that I don't think we've really seen that much of, or that pronounced, or that we haven't seen like horror elements really pronounced that much in the Twilight Zone so far. Some here and there. I'm thinking of Perchance to Dream has some horror imagery that evokes those horror feelings of the genre. And here it's played to an interesting effect, because the set is really remarkable, and you get the scene where Marcia is in the elevator, and the mystery. So we're established that she's going to the 9th floor, and we're shown twice that the elevator does not go up to the 9th floor. So it sets up it sets up this feeling of suspense that's going to carry throughout the rest of the episode, and the mystery surrounding the 9th floor is something that's going to we're going to be on a journey with the character to discover it, essentially. And there's something to be said about the vulnerability of Marcia as she's in this elevator, because we know that the elevator doesn't, or that the store doesn't have a 9th floor. Yet this strange man that is operating the elevator for her is taking her to a floor that doesn't exist. And there's this vulnerability in that there's this woman who is alone in an elevator with a stranger going to a place that doesn't exist, or that we're shown it does not exist. And there's a little bit of a tension there. There's some suspense there because we don't know what's in store for this character or what's going to happen. And part of that makes me unsettled a little bit. And I think that was to great effect in the episode. And so she gets to the 9th floor, and it's Serling's narration refers to it as specialties department. And I think that the elevator operator says it's specialties as well. And I just want to take a moment to talk about some weird questions I had about this. The fact that this 9th floor exists and the state that it exists in, it raises some questions for me about the world of the mannequins. And those questions don't necessarily need to be answered. But if you'll humor me, I'll be brief. The store manager later in the episode, he says that there are only 8 floors. And the elevator says it as well, even though the buttons actually go to 9. But the display on the front of the elevator, on the outside of the door, only goes up to 8. So my question is, where does the space of the 9th floor exist? Does the elevator stop at 8, but then it just transport into another dimension, into the Twilight Zone itself? Like, where does the physical space of the 9th floor exist in relation to everything else about the store? Again, that's a question that doesn't need to be answered. It's just something that I was thinking about when I was watching the episode. And when rewatching it, after learning the truth about the mannequins and that one of them gets to leave for 1 month at a time, and it makes me think more about what that means for that, like, kind of secret society of mannequins that are living in this department store. It made me wonder, like, what are their lives like? How does this hidden society exist, and what are the rules of it, like, in general? And it's really interesting to me because there's not much to the actual story of the mannequins. It's a disguised twist, so we don't really get a sense for what the implications of it could possibly mean to the greater story. So are they just trapped? They're separate from humans, and they're living in secret. Is it because humans wouldn't accept them? Are they trapped humans? It raises a lot of questions, and the fact that the mannequins get to live amongst people for a month at a time, for one mannequin for a month at a time, that just makes me wonder, like, to what end is that? Is that like is that just like a vacation? Is it to what end is it? Do the mannequins feel like they're outsiders to the world, or that they're relegated to occupying a very small space in secret? So it made me really wonder. This episode left me with several questions about the nature of the mannequin society, which is a sentence I never thought that I would ever say in my life. So after Marcia gets to the 9th floor, that's when I kind of started piecing the episode back together from when I saw it as a teenager. And it was a really interesting experience. Because at that point, the episode was coming back to me, and I realized at that point that she's really a mannequin, and I was I remembered that the mannequins are allowed to come alive every now and then. And so I kind of had the pieces of the twist there. And I remembered it kind of, not vividly, but I had like fragments of memory about it. And I have to say, it was really bizarre watching an episode of The Twilight Zone and having actual memories of seeing it before, especially after going through 33 episodes of the show for the first time. So I really like the way that everything was presented to us as the audience. We're seeing the surreal and mysterious stuff that's occurring. We're seeing it through Marcia's perspective. And since she doesn't remember being a mannequin, it it disguises the twist really well, and it makes us feel the confusion and mystery and terror that Marcia experiences throughout the episode. And to that effect, when we learn the truth, it's a genuine surprise, which also kind of sucks that I remember seeing this episode and I could remember the twist, because I wonder how my first viewing would have been had I not, stopped on the Twilight Zone at that time on New Year's Day when I was a teenager. But that's neither here nor there. So there's a scene with Marcia and the saleswoman, and there's so much mystery surrounding it, and it seems very suspenseful and eerie. Really, that's what I would break it down to. It's very eerie and unsettling, because the saleswoman is like almost going out of her way to be kind of not natural in her dealings with Marcia. And there's one line that I want to point out in particular, where the saleswoman asks Marcia, she says, "Miss White, are you happy?" And I really thought that was a really interesting non sequitur in the episode. And I didn't necessarily dismiss it the first time I saw it, but I didn't really think much of it or much about it on a deeper level on that first viewing. However, when I saw it a second time, I started to wonder if that speaks to what the theme of the episode would be, or if that is an indication of what the story that Serling was trying to tell was. Because it's such a unique sentence, such a unique statement, a question to ask the protagonist, seemingly out of nowhere. And it made me wonder, like, why does the shopkeeper, or why does the sales lady want to know if she's happy? And it kind of dawned on me that it feels like this episode is about someone leaving their home and their culture and their world and acclimating to a new world and a new way of life. And it made me think of like people losing touch with their roots and kind of forgetting where they came from. And when I thought about it in that context, the saleswoman asking Marcia if she's happy, it kind of conjured an image in my head of a mother asking if her daughter is satisfied with her life after the daughter has moved away from home, or they don't have as much contact as they used to have. And that read on it made it kind of powerful to me, because this is a story about a woman who has escaped her, you would argue, prison-like life, because these mannequins are confined to a very finite space, and a majority of the time of their existence is spent completely inanimate. And she has escaped it so much that she has ignored or forgotten her true nature. And it made me think of, when you leave home and when you leave home for the first time, or you leave and kind of lose touch with where you're from. So Marcia leaves, Marcia buys the thimble, and she heads back to the elevator. She notices there's a scratch, so she sends so the operator sends her to the third floor for the complaints department. And then this is where the episode kind of shifts a little bit, and we get a scene with the manager of the store and a man, maybe the head of sales, or I don't know who he is, but his name is Mr. Armbruster, and he's played by James Mulholland, like I said earlier, and his performance, it's like he plays this snooty store guy so well, and I really liked his performance there. He just plays that character so well, and it's to great comedic effect. There are some things about his actions I was kind of like a little bewildered by, but I'll get to that in a moment. But overall, I liked that there was a shift in the perspective, because we've been following Marcia through this ordeal. We've experienced the strange behavior and the strange nature of what's going on, and now we're getting the other side of it. So now we know that this isn't some secret that the store owner and store manager has kept ducked away, and that maybe Marcia is at risk because she's going to expose it or anything. We get the sense that it is a supernatural Twilight Zone-y kind of thing because Mr. Sloan and Armbruster, they don't know what the deal is. There is no ninth floor. There is no saleswoman, and from their perspective, Marcia is just kind of off her rocker. And I think that's to really great effect in this episode because we've got an abundance of suspenseful things leading up to a very bizarre interaction. And at this point now we're shifting to kind of a normal characters reacting to allegations of that or ideas of that weirdness. And it made me think a lot of the episode Mirror Image in that it's, we have a character whose sense of sanity is being subverted by characters that aren't in on the crazy behavior that's going on. And so Marcia is very angry and upset over the fact that they don't believe her. And Anne Francis plays this character so well. She's great at playing this indignant customer, and that paired with like this kind of very beautiful look that she has is just really great. She's really great at playing this kind of upset customer who's not being serviced. I really appreciated her performance there. And so then there's a break in this scene where Marcia sees the saleswoman from afar, and we get this double take shot to where she yells for the lady, and then we see the camera zooms over to her, and in that shot, apparently, it is the actress standing there. And then we get a cut to Marcia's face and yelling for her again, and then when we cut back to the saleswoman from behind, that's the mannequin. And I like how there's this very fast zoom up to Marcia's face with her hands on her cheek, and it's on her cheeks when she sees that the saleswoman is a mannequin. Today in 2016, that can be construed as such a cheesy effect, but seeing it used so much in the Twilight Zone, it's endearing to me. Like, it's like viewing a kind of time capsule to when certain techniques were not so overdone or didn't have some silly, almost satirical connotations to them. And I just appreciate that because I can appreciate that at the time they wouldn't be viewed as silly as they would be today. And so at this point, the story progresses, and Marcia is kind of forgotten, and she falls asleep on a couch and wakes up after everyone's left. And when I first saw this episode, I was kind of confused by this because I didn't really catch on to what was exactly happening. I don't know exactly how I missed it, but for the record, what happened was that Armbruster told a clerk lady, I think her name was Miss Peters, to go and talk to Marcia and explain to her that they'll get it sorted out or what have you. But then as she's about to go, she gets called away to attend to a customer before she could go talk to Marcia. And that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. She wakes up after everyone's gone. It's just kind of bizarre. I mean, you need to take a couple steps to allow, you need to kind of turn your back on some questions that may raise in terms of suspension of disbelief, but that's fine. So this whole sequence where she's trapped in the store, this is like the high point of the episode. There's a ton of a sense of tension and terror. It has really strong feelings of like a thriller or a suspense story. It's brimming with suspense. And at this point, the mannequins, they're becoming a little bit more prominent than they were earlier. Like in the beginning, they were just established, in the set as background and set dressing. But here, they're much more prominent in the frame, and they're very they occupy so much more space. They're kind of closer to the camera than they were before. And they're so creepy. There's no way around it. They're incredibly creepy. And the slow way that Marcia walks through the store, just really amplifies the sense of foreboding and danger that she's in. And I love this scene where she tries to call the elevator, but it doesn't come. So she tries the stairwell, but it's locked. And there's a shot of her yelling through the window of the stairwell door. And we see it from the other side of the door. So the glass is like, I think it's like frosted, or it's the glass is set up in a way where it's distorting her image on the other side. So we get this really great shot of Marcia's face, super distorted as she's yelling for help. And it kind of feels like a Hitchcockian device, and it feels like a very horror specific film device. And I think it works really well. And then we get the actual like moving mannequin as she passes by it, and that's just so creepy, so creepy. And at this point, that's when they start speaking to her, and that's when I kind of lost my cool, because it's done so well. Because there are flashes of their faces, and they're not like animated. They're not speaking. Their mouths aren't moving. They're not ventriloquist dummies. They're just stationary, and you can hear it almost telepathically. And as each face flashes on the screen or in the frame, it's accompanied by them calling her name. And they're not calling in a threatening manner. They're not calling in a like I'm gonna get you kind of way. They're using soothing tones and calm voices, and that is so unsettling. Like, that got so under my skin and made me so uncomfortable in the best possible way. And then it's like they're goading her into admitting the truth. And this whole sequence reaches this terrifying crescendo where the voices, in a sense, push her into the elevator. And that alone that's a really great image, because it's like she's being assaulted. She's being assaulted by these voices, and she's basically backing away because she feels threatened. And then when she gets into the elevator, it's like she's pushed, and I just love that. I love that element of it. And then we get her up to the 9th floor, and the saleswoman freaks her out first. That's such a creepy shot where the elevator door is open and she's right there. But then when she gets to the 9th floor, we get her reuniting with the saleswoman, and the saleswoman is comforting her and kind of, I think at one point they're embracing. And I feel like that reinforces this mother and daughter connection that I made earlier, and that made me appreciate it a lot more. And so at this point, we're closing in on the end. Marcia has this great line where she's just like, "I'm a mannequin," and I don't know, just something about that. I mean, it's such a bizarre sentence. It's such a weird sentence that, I don't know. It was just strange. It not in a bad way. It was just strange to hear someone say that. Because when you really think about it, this whole plot is really, really strange. So we learned that it was her turn to be among people, like regular people, for a month, and she overstayed, and so now the saleswoman has like she's a day late on her little vacation. And there's a moment where Marcia refers to human beings as the others, the outsiders, the real people. And it's really interesting to think about this whole society that exists in this episode of these mannequins. And it's really interesting, but there's not enough for me to really think very deeply about it or think about it. It doesn't provoke that deep of thoughts. And that's kind of a shame. That's a little bit of that's a shame. I was disappointed in that, but I did pick up more on the dynamics of the mannequins and everything on the second viewing, but still, I kind of wish that there was a little bit more there. And so we get Marcia changing into a mannequin. She's kind of becoming her normal self again. And there's so much sadness to that. There's this really down tone that she uses when she's asked if she had a good time, and she says it was ever so much fun. It was ever so much fun. And there's just this deep sadness in that she's disappointed that she's back to being a mannequin, and it's really kind of heartbreaking. Yeah, and dare I say that I liked part of I think that in terms of the mannequin society that's hinted at and shown in this episode, The Twilight Zone, there's an element of it that expands upon it in the 1980s remake that I kind of wish was incorporated a little more into this original episode. I wish that this was an idea that was explored in Serling's script, because it's really interesting. I'll talk more about that in my bonus review, but anyway, so the episode closes with Armbruster kind of scurrying around the department store, and he's great. He's really great, but this is, I don't know, there's a couple shots where he stares directly into the camera, and it's used, I think it's played for comedic effect, but and maybe it's more a thing of the time, and maybe I'm just not used to that in things, but it honestly, it did not land with me. It was distracting. It was kind of like I don't know, it was like he was staring into the camera for like a effect or something. I don't know. It didn't land with me. I just thought it was really distracting. And I like Serling's closing narration a bit. I like it. I think it's pretty strong. It seemed like he was really trying to sell the scary aspect of this episode in that closing narration, and I like that he incorporates. He asks, "Just how normal are we as people?" And I like that, but I think that I would have liked it more if that as a theme was explored a little more in this episode. Like I would have liked it. I would have enjoyed it more if, like the idea of human beings being others, outsiders, and real people as opposed to the mannequins. I wish that was a theme that was explored more. But it was fine overall. So for trivia for this episode, I don't have hardly anything. The only thing I have is that this episode in 2008 was adapted into a graphic novel, Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone, The After Hours. And it looks like it's out of print. The graphic novel's out of print on Amazon, but they have some that are for sale, like by other sellers. And they're pretty. They look like they're pretty cheap. I don't know if I'll pick one up, but yeah, you can get it as low as $1 plus shipping. So that's not bad. So in closing, kind of overall, my overall thoughts on The After Hours is that this is an episode that I initially didn't like. I wasn't too crazy about it. But overall, I really love the horror feel of this episode, and the ending of it had an effect on me that shows and movies rarely do. So even though I initially didn't care for that, for the story and the journey to it, the ending and the horror elements of it really had an effect on me, and I really appreciate the episode for that. And in particular, the effects of the mannequins calling to Marcia in the climax was just very frightening and really well done. It's something that really stands out, to me even today. And I have a friend at work who I was talking to about this episode, who she said that her sister, when they were kids, when they would go to like the mall, her sister would point to the mannequins, or as they were passing by the mannequins, she would whisper her name to her, to my coworker, my friend. It's just, I thought that was hilarious. So initially I wasn't crazy about it, like I said, but when you dig deeper into the story, it seems to be more about coming home and accepting who you are and lamenting that you can't break free of who you are or what have you. And whether that's intentional or not, I honestly don't know. For all I know, Rod Serling could have just been inspired by that short story to write a story about a lady who turns out to be a mannequin because mannequins are creepy. But if you choose to read into it what you can, I think that that's an easy thing to read into this episode if you're looking for it. And that is something that I love about the Twilight Zone so far, is that I can find these little things that I can resonate with me, and I can find little pieces here and there that I can latch onto that even if they're not intentional, they still fit because it's such a great work of art that Serling and everyone involved with it put together, because it's something that can still resonate today, and that's why I'm still doing this podcast and I'm really enjoying it. So overall, the After Hours is pretty good. I don't know where it'll rank with season 1 for me, but it's definitely not a bad episode. I really enjoyed it, and I think Anne Francis did a fantastic job in particular, and I hope that her role in Jezebel is just as good. All right, before we move on to this week's bonus review, here's a highlight from episode 180 of The Obsessive Viewer. It's a weekly movie and TV podcast that I host over at obsessiveviewer.com. It reaches a point where we find out more information about the villain, but I feel like if they would have done that much earlier in the movie and contrasted that with another story arc to kind of give it more meaning, I think it would have been a lot better. It would have been a much better movie. Of course, you can always find The Obsessive Viewer on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and at obsessiveviewer.com. And you can find the episode you just heard a clip from at obsessiveviewer.com/OV180. And so for this week's bonus review, I'm going to be reviewing the remake of The After Hours. This was an episode of the Twilight Zone's 1980s revival that was paired with a short story called Lost and Found. And IMDb and Wikipedia, they list this episode, I believe it's season 2, episode 4, as having 3 stories. And I looked and they all aired on the same day, but the DVD that I have, which is the Twilight Zone, the 5th Dimension Collector's Edition box set, it includes the 1980s Twilight Zone episodes and series. So the DVD itself has this as episode 4 of season 2 with 2 stories. So I'm going off of that. So I'm going to be reviewing the After Hours and Lost and Found in this bonus review. So with the After Hours, this is the first time I'm ever seeing any of the 80s Twilight Zone, except for the opening theme music, when one of you guys emailed me in about it. And I don't know, the opening theme music, I hate the image of the spider. I hate spiders, so that didn't work for me. And it kind of seems a little like it meanders a little bit, this opening theme music. Yeah, it kind of takes a while to get going, to actually get to the, Twilight Zone music. I think the Grateful Dead did it. And this episode starts out with the main character plays up the urgency of her needing an item tonight. And I think that was a nice touch. It lends a sense of urgency, as I said, but it seems like she has purpose, and that's something that's going to be robbed away from her at the end of the episode, obviously. But I don't know. It's the 80s. The acting is super goofy. It really is. And in this, I don't know. It seems super, like, really dated. Like if you watch the original Twilight Zone, it's kind of classic. It's got this vintage feel to it, but also in a timeless way. It's a timeless piece of art. But the 80s were just, what was everyone doing? Yeah. So I wasn't too crazy about the feel of it, the aesthetic and the acting in the episode. But I did want to point out that this interpretation of the story focuses on this sense of being watched and followed. And I thought that that was an interesting take, and it differentiated it from the original pretty well. And that kind of made me wonder, that when I noticed that, I was thinking, well, I wonder what made them choose this episode to remake. And I can't for the life of me figure out why. I mean, it's a good episode, but I mean, you have 155 other episodes to choose from. And that's, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the fan base feels about, the After Hours, but I think that it's just kind of a just okay episode to remake, in the 80s. I don't know. I would be curious to find out what went into choosing that episode. So the main character goes into the mall, and even though it's about to close, and she goes to a toy store, and the item that she's looking for is actually this toy that she's buying for her landlord's daughter, which I thought was pretty random, but it fits fine. But what I found interesting was she actually says when she gets to the little the toy store, she can't find anyone working in it, so she says. So she calls out to see if anyone's there, but she doesn't say like, "Oh, hey, is anyone there?" or anything. She uses the words, "Is anybody home?" which I thought was kind of funny and a little clever on the screenwriter's part. And so there's a point in this episode that it differentiates from the original, or there's a scene that I kind of think would have been more to my liking in the original episode. So that scene is where this kid wanders up to Marcia. And the kid says the kid is asking Marcia to take her with her. Like it's kind of, it's not begging, but it's kind of like, "Oh, hey, take me with you, Marcia." And I think that is a really good element to add both to the mystery of what's going on and to the idea of the society of mannequins that exist, like, and live among us without us knowing. I think that was a really good element, and I think that I probably would have liked the original a lot more, or I would have found more to think about, and it would have been more thought-provoking if they would have included that. I mean, there's kind of a similar scene or similar interaction in the original with one of the mannequins asking like how it was and everything, but it doesn't hit that same effect here, because this makes it feel like the kid asking Marcia to take her with her. It feels more like the mannequins are prisoners in this version of it, and that plays into that effect is played up toward the end of the episode. And I don't know, I thought it was an interesting slant on the story, even though I wasn't too crazy about the acting of the episode overall. And so the shopkeeper, when she buys the toy, I really like that she's like interrogating Marcia, and it reminded me a bit of the episode Nightmare as a Child, where Marky is yelling at the character, asking her to remember, essentially. And then there's some other things. I don't want to spoil it too much, but there's kind of a chase sequence, and there's some eerie effects that are done. Like there's a character whose hands are kind of fused together in a plastic mannequin way, and I think that was a really interesting. I think that was a really interesting effect, and it was pretty well done. The reveal at the end, I think, took a little too long, and they mimicked the creepiest aspects of the original, but it wasn't as effective as the original was. And I don't know. By the end of it, I thought that it was pretty okay. There isn't much deviation from the original story, but I mean, it was handled pretty well. But the original is going to win out for me, obviously, hands down. And what's interesting is that they don't have an opening narration for this episode. I don't know if the rest of the 80s Twilight Zone is like that, but they do have a closing narration, and the closing narration was done by Charles Aidman, which I think he did a fine job, much better than the narration that was in 2002's revival with Forrest Whitaker. I thought that was just not. It was awkward and clunky, at least in the one episode that I saw. The monsters are on Maple Street. So I'm going to close this out by just saying that there's two stories in this episode. So after the after hours, there's this short little story called Lost and Found. And it's notable because it was written by George R.R. Martin. And it was based on a short story, but George R.R. Martin was one of the writers on the 80s Twilight Zone. And in my notes I don't like the format of this iteration of the series because it's a 24-minute episode and only part of it is the after hours and the other part of it is this other smaller story that isn't as interesting. Like I watched it, like I was watching it to watch the after hours. I didn't really want to sit through this this other little short story. And then it dawned on me at the end of the episode that, like I mentioned that, but that's the same format as this podcast. Like that's the exact same format that I chose for my podcast, and I don't like it in the Twilight Zone revival, but I'm doing the same thing here, and I just thought that was kind of funny. Anyway, so this story is about these two women in a dorm room who one of them finds that weird things are happening around her, like her trash disappears, her pencil mug disappears, and it kind of makes you think, okay, well maybe it's the stress of study, maybe it's supposed to be about the stress of studying, and maybe she's losing her mind, but the twist is kind of silly, and I don't know if I should spoil it. I'm not going to spoil it, and that's such a shame because it has one of the silliest lines in it. It's really silly. It's very straightforward. It's not that thought provoking. It is something that is a cliche at this point, or it's something that's more satirical than anything. It's something that you would see in like a comedy, because it's really silly. It's got a time travel aspect to it that is kind of, I don't know, it's just okay, but I don't know. It was really bad. I did not like it, and luckily it was pretty brief. So if you guys feel that way about my bonus reviews, hopefully they're a little brief too. And so now I kind of just want to mention, as I'm winding down, that now that I've sampled each iteration of the Twilight Zone, I'm obviously almost done with season 1 of the original series. I've now seen at least a sample of the 80s revival, and then I've also reviewed the 2002 revival with Forrest Whitaker for my The Monsters Are on Maple Street review. That was in the episode reviewing The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. Now that I have a sense of each one, and this is going to be sacrilegious, and I know that they have talked about it before. I haven't heard any news on this, but I honestly think, seeing the way that it was revived in years past, I really think that they could bring it back today, and with the right people, I think that they could do it justice in a much better way than what the other two iterations were. And granted, that's not fair because I haven't seen the rest of them. The 80s Twilight Zone could be fantastic. I don't know. But the sense that I got watching the After Hours and Lost and Found was that it wasn't very good. So I think that with the right creative force behind it, I really think they could bring it back and do something really unique and do something that would reflect our culture today and what we're going through as a society today. I think that they could really, really do some incredible stuff with it. But the point is, the important thing to remember is that it would have to be with the right creative mind. And to say, okay, well, we need the right creative mind to bring back the Twilight Zone, that's also to say we need a Rod Serling. And from what I'm finding, going through the Twilight Zone and learning about Rod Serling as I'm going through it, there's no other Rod Serling. I mean, the guy was just a freaking genius and amazing. So I say that we should do another, like that they should do another Twilight Zone, but I also say that with the caveat that they won't be able to find someone as talented as Serling to do it. So that's going to do it for this week's episode of Anthology. Of course, I'm also doing my bonus reviews of Black Mirror. At this point, I'm digging into season 3, and I'm almost done with those. And I really hope you guys are enjoying them, and I hope you're listening to them. And if you are, let me know. Let me know what you think of Black Mirror. And, of course, you can always let me know what you think about the show and about the Twilight Zone and any of the bonus reviews I have by emailing me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. And next week on the podcast, I am going to be reviewing the penultimate episode of Season 1 of The Twilight Zone, The Mighty Casey. And for a bonus review on that, I'm going to be reviewing, as I mentioned before, The Comedian, which was an episode of Playhouse 90. That was written by Rod Serling, and I do believe he won an Emmy for it. I think that was one of the things he won an Emmy for. I'll have to fact check that and get to it next week. But, so yeah, we're coming up on the end, and I am so happy, that I'm almost done with this. I'm excited to go to season 2. I'm excited to, finish out the season. I'm really excited about this, guys. And, in preparation for that, I'm going to be doing an episode, after finishing season 1, I'm going to be doing an episode wrapping up season 1. So to do that, I want you guys to let me know what you thought of season 1 of The Twilight Zone overall. I want to hear your favorite moments, your favorite endings, your favorite overall episodes. And I also want to hear your least favorite moments, endings, and episodes. And please email me those at matt@obsessiveviewer.com or send me a message on the Facebook page, which if you're listening to this and you haven't liked the Facebook page, go ahead and like the Facebook page. It's at facebook.com/anthologypod. All right. And until next time, I'll catch you guys later. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to Anthology, presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. You can find more episodes at anthologypod.com, and you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or your preferred podcast app. If you'd like to help support the podcast, please take a few minutes to leave a rating and a review on iTunes. The more reviews I get, the higher the show will be ranked in iTunes search results, making it easier for people to discover it and grow the podcast. Of course, you can always email me your thoughts and feelings about the show to matt@obsessiveviewer.com. You can also tweet me at ObsessiveViewer, like the Facebook page at facebook.com/anthologypod, or you can call and leave me a voicemail at 317-762-6099 for a chance to have it played on the show. If you like what you've heard here, I urge you to check out The Obsessive Viewer, a weekly movie and TV podcast I host with my friends Mike and Tiny. Also check out the Obsessive Viewer blog at obsessiveviewer.com, where I write movie reviews, TV reviews, and the occasional editorial about the business of entertainment. If you want even more obsessive content in your life, subscribe to the Obsessive Viewer subreddit at r/obsessiveviewer, and check out obsessivebooknerd.com, our sister site for book reviews, author spotlights, and a general celebration of reading. Finally, if you're philosophically curious, check out my friend Tiny's side project podcast, The Secular Perspective, which explores the concepts of faith, religion, and existence from the perspective of secular hosts. You can find that at thesecularperspective.com. Once again, thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you next time.